Hello, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome back to our class here. Hope everyone had a great start to the week, and now here we are towards the end of the week. Man, it's going by quick, huh? I don't know how you're feeling. Hope you're doing well. Hope you and your families are safe and are, um, you know, uh, what am I trying to say here? I just hope you're well. I hope you're well. Hope you're feeling good. Okay. So we are going to continue with the medieval period, also known as the Middle Ages. Okay. We're going to get through it here. Um, Now, last time we were talking about the early part of the Middle Ages. And by the way, quizzes, thank you so much. There's still some of you who have not turned in the quiz. Um, I am being a little lenient here under these circumstances, but my concern is for some of you is that uh, these things are going to start to get piled up, and it's going to be towards the end of the year, and you're going to have a whole pile of other of stuff for this class left to do. And maybe if you're letting things slide in this class, maybe you're also letting them slide in other classes. So, I mean, this is not a good situation that you're putting yourselves in by not doing these things on time. So, I mean, I'm being understanding, and uh, you know, I'm not really taking off for lateness and stuff. If you get it into me within a couple of days, I'm trying to be understanding that way, but it's not it has nothing to do with me really. It's just that I'm concerned for you if you let these things go too far. So, but anyway, we just took our quiz on antiquity and the first part of the Middle Ages, and now we are getting into the later Middle Ages. Remember, the Middle Ages lasted for a long time, 476 until about 1400. So that is several centuries. We'll put it that way. And now we're gonna skip through some stuff here. We're not gonna spend so much time because we have another 1,000 years of music to go. So we're not gonna get too bogged down here in the Middle Ages. And besides, there's projects to be done and stuff like that. I'll explain that maybe in our next lesson. But let's get going. Okay, so we're gonna talk about two guys, two dudes known by their first names, or we only know their one name for each of them. And these guys were called Leonin and Perotin. Okay. So little is known about these two composers. We know that they lived and composed during the mid to late 12th century and early 13th century. From the limited documents that we have, and the documents that we do have are all from one source. It's an anonymous student at the Notre Dame school. We don't know who the student is, but we have his notes, and he's referred actually. He's given the nickname of Anonymous 4, Anonymous IV. That's what he's known as. So we have these notes from Anonymous 4 that talk about Leonin and Perotin, and we also have music that's ascribed to them. By the way, Anonymous 4 is the name of a singing group that does music from this time period, so you might want to check them out. They're actually an all-girl group, the Anonymous 4. Okay, so, but from the limited documents that we do have from Anonymous 4, we know that Leonin was Perotin's teacher, although we do know that Perotin would go on to be a more prolific composer during his lifetime than Leonin. We have more material from Perotin, and because it's from slightly later. I know they have a lot of overlap, but Periton did live farther into the future than Leo did, and because of this, he helped to develop more advanced and complex concepts within music. So he's kind of more highly regarded, I guess, so that they're both given their due. They were both part of what was known as the Notre Dame School. As I said before, their classmate, Anonymous 4, they called him Anani, I guess, maybe as a nickname for short, who knows? But if you're thinking Notre Dame, now as Americans we say Notre Dame, but that's not actually how you pronounce it. It's Notre Dame en français. It is French for Our Lady, and you might have heard of this name before because of the college in South Bend, Indiana, and the football team there, and also the famous cathedral in Paris. And indeed, this is the Notre Dame Cathedral in Paris. This is where they get the name. It's because they lived and worked around this cathedral. Unfortunately, you can't go visit it. I mean, even before COVID, you couldn't go visit it because 1 year ago, actually this month, there was that horrendous fire that pretty much destroyed and made it impossible to go visit. Luckily, they were able to rescue some of the great works of art that were stored in there, and some of the religious artifacts and stuff like that that were important to the more religiously inclined people that were happy that they were saved. But it's basically just the shell of the cathedral that's left, and last I heard they were planning on rebuilding, but I'm sure with everything that's going on now, that is kind of on the back burner. But just think about it, 12th century, right? I mean, this goes back to about the year 800, Notre Dame Cathedral. Okay, so now we're here in the 1100s and the 1200s with Léonin and Periton. And they were in this Notre Dame school, and what the school was, it was a place where people would learn music, but really more than learning it, I mean, they would learn it, but more than learning it, it was about writing music for the church and for the religious life surrounding the church. Okay, so they would actually write music for the Catholic Mass, but they would also write religious music to be sung outside of church, just the priests or the people who, the religious people who were, to have something outside of their normal worship service. Okay, and the most important thing we need to know about Léonin and Periton is that they were both early innovators and helped to create and develop one of the most important concepts in the history of music, which is called polyphony. They were early innovators in this field of polyphony, and they actually helped to create it and develop it. Some of the earliest examples of polyphony that we have come from Léonin and Periton, and this is one of the most important concepts in the history of music, and that's not an exaggeration. Without this concept, we would not have the music that we have today. This was a pivot point in music history. This changed everything that came after this development of polyphony. So what is polyphony? Well, polyphony, it really is the counter to monophony. We talked about monophonic music last time. So whereas mono meant one, poly means many. Okay, so polyphony is when you have multiple pitches sounding either simultaneously or at different intervals. Okay, The key here is that you have different pitches being sounded at the same time. This is polyphony. For the first time in recorded music history, we actually get harmony in music. Now, chances are you had harmony in music before this, but these are the earliest written examples, recorded examples of it. This did not completely replace plain chant, but was used alongside of it as another way, as they saw it, to show reverence towards God, right? Remember, this is religious music in the church that was being written during this time, and that was the purpose of having music, right? Was to show that proper reverence. So polyphony started simple, with one or more voices singing what's called a drone, and then different voices singing the melody on top of it. Now, what is a drone? A drone, in this context, is not the type of drone that Mr. Cook flies around the school, right? In this context, a drone is a long, sustained single pitch, so just one note, normally sounding in the lower register, so it's normally a one long note that would sound constantly throughout, one long low note that would sound constantly throughout the piece of music while other voices sang a variety of pitches on top of it. So while people are singing the melody, there's just one guy, or maybe even more than one guys, singing. Right? And the and the people singing on top of it would create harmony with that one pitch. Okay, so as different scholars developed music even further, polyphony got even more and more complex. So that's kind of polyphony in its simplest form. And then throughout the Middle Ages, and later periods of music, as scholars and composers and music theorists and what have you were writing treatises and explaining and trying to come up with new advances and innovations in music. This polyphony would get more complex than just that, right? It's like learning to crawl before you can walk and stuff, and learning to walk before you can run, right? These things build up progressively. So what I want you to do is, you could do it now or at the end of this video. I want you to listen to one of my favorite pieces of polyphony by Perotin. It's called Viderunt Omnes, and this is one of the earliest examples of polyphony that we have. You notice there is a drone here, but there are also three voices singing on top of the drone. The version that I'm going to link has all of the pieces in modern, all of the notes are in modern notation, so you don't have to know how to read the different style of notation that they were using in the Middle Ages, known as pneumatic notation. You don't have to do that. Or, I mean, you don't have to know how to read music at all, but if you do know how to read music, if you're in a band or orchestra or chorus, then you can kind of follow along, right? But it's not required to listen to it. Okay. Okay. So let's talk about some later composers of medieval polyphony. There's two big ones. I'm talking about Guillaume de Machaut and Guillaume du Fay. A couple French guys. We were all French back then. Ever notice that? No, I'm just kidding. But France was a hot spot, I guess, for lack of a better term, for a lot of this activities. It was, Paris, is a kind of a capital, is not just the political capital of France, but it's kind of its cultural capital as well. And Paris has a history of great thinking and innovation and things like that, and art and culture, throughout history. So It was the same back then. So Guillaume, by the way, if you don't know, is the French word for William. So these are my guys, Billy Machot and Billy Dufay. And they were medieval composers towards the end of the Middle Ages. They composed mainly in the genre of motets. What is a motet? A motet is a short piece of religious polyphony, normally about 5 minutes long, but could be a little bit more or a little bit less. Because these are not music written for the Mass, remember, Mass is the main worship service in the Catholic Church, and those the music written for Masses are long because, Mass is like, an hour, over an hour, right? So there's probably about, 30 to 45 minutes worth of that is going to be music. And so when you look at these Masses that I'm going to link, they're very long. The motets are short because they are meant to happen outside of the Mass. And because of that, you can get them in Latin, right? Which the Masses were written in the language of Latin. But every once in a while, you'll get a motet that is written in what's called the vernacular language, or the language of the composer. So with Machot and Dufay, you're going to have these motets written in both Latin and French, because they're French. Okay. So I want you to listen to the motets by both Machot and Dufay below. And as you're listening to them, just notice how much more complex it sounds compared to that of Periton. If you notice in the Periton, the rhythms kind of are basically the same, and they move together. In the Vide Runt Omnes by Periton, you have a lot of what are called melismas. A melisma is when you have a lot of different notes for one syllable. So you're going to notice it's going to go V. It's going to be like 2 minutes on one syllable. You're going to notice that. But you'll notice that all of the voices are kind of moving together in the same basic rhythm with, it will vary marginally, but it's going to be mostly the same. In Machot and Dufay, you have these, in these 3 voice motets, these voices are doing, one line is doing something completely different from the second line, and maybe they're singing the same text, but they're singing it at all different times. And it's so that is a big advancement, right? It's much harder to sing something like that than it is the Periton. Not taking anything away from Periton, but it's much more complex to do something like that. Okay, so this is the music that was rapidly developing as we enter the next period of music history, which is the Renaissance. So this is the music that is going to lead us into the Renaissance. And it makes sense, right? That things would be improving, would be increasing in complexity, would be changing stylistically, right? We know now that, the music that we listen to now is different than the music that we listened to 10 years ago. And the music that we listened to 10 years ago was different from the music that we were listening to the 90s. And the music we were listening to in the 90s was much different than what the music was listening to in the 80s. So, I mean, that's not even, forget about complexity, it's just stylistically, it's just completely different, right? Music doesn't stay the same, it changes all the time. And sometimes it stays the same for longer than other times, but it's always changing, it's always getting different. So it would make sense now that things are going to change, which, I mean, this is why the Renaissance begins, right? Because the music is different than the Middle Ages. Otherwise, it would just be the Middle Ages for longer, right? Makes sense. Okay. Hopefully, I didn't confuse you too much. What you're going to do, what you're going to submit today is you're going to submit a copy of the notes that you took. This could either be as a Google Doc, or it could be a picture. Take a picture of your notes with your phone or iPad or something, upload it onto your Google Drive, and then submit that, okay? Either one of those would be fine. Or if there's another way that you know how to submit something that I'm not saying, that's fine too, okay? As long as it gets uploaded onto our Google Classroom on the assignment. I just want to make sure that you are following along. You're watching the whole lesson. You know, it takes a while, guys, to plan these things out and then to create the slideshows and then to record them. So I would hate to think that you guys are not watching these full things. That would really kind of bum me out. So make sure that you're watching the whole thing and you know, submitting your notes. And you know, it's why I kind of have you submit stuff, is so, you know, not all of it's graded, but it kind of lets me know that, yeah, it lets me know who's following along, who's watching these things, who's attending class, and who's not, right? That's kind of how I have an idea. So yeah, I guess that's it. If there's any questions, please let me know. You know, my office hours are every day, Monday through Friday, 1:30 p.m. to 2:15 p.m. By the way, that's going to change soon. Probably next week it will change. So I'll be posting an update soon as to oh, how that's going to change, why it's going to change. It's not going to be so different, but I think it will be better. I think it will be better for me and for you. Okay. Alrighty. Any questions? No? All right. Bye.